it to record. And I'm just going to say that this is Jackie Markham talking to Alec Lowe for the Kingsland Oral History project. And today's date is the 24th of July 2019. Now, Alec, first, could you just tell me where and when you were born in Kingsland?
Yeah, I was born in Herefordshire Hospital in 1948, and I was taken home to Kingsland and lived at Sunnyside next to the post office, and that was where I stayed until I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old from my memory. But I can remember distinctly living there and really riding my tricycle up and down the street, and it was quite a nice place to be. But my grandparents were with us at Sunnyside, and Dad ran a business doing water schemes for farms and whatever. Dad was actually a sheet metal worker by trade, and he spent a lot of time in Egypt in the war doing repairing water tankers and various metal bits for aeroplanes and trucks and everything. So then when he came to Kingsland and started the business there, it was probably a good business for him to go into, because he was pretty good with metalwork and pumps and all that sort of stuff. So I used to go around with him when I was a bit older on various jobs. I remember we used to go to Burley Gate or Lingen or outlying areas around here, putting water schemes in, and he'd put particularly Lister pumping sets in. So I remember all that, and all the I used to be fascinated with cars and machinery, of course. So all the farms around here had old tractors and various bits of machinery that got me sort of hooked, and I really started tinkering with machinery, I think, at quite an early age. So then when I got a bit older, we moved up the road here to Glendour, just past Mortimer's, just out past the Monument pub. And I remember my grandfather used to walk up to the pub every day. This was the Monument when it was still open, and he'd have a pint or two and then walk back. And that was a daily ritual in those days. And then, of course, Mum played the organ at the church there for, well, as long as I can remember. So I joined the choir, and I became a soprano singer, much to my surprise. But I used to even sing solos at Christmas time, carols and all that sort of thing. I can't believe it now, I think back on that. But anyway, that's what happened. And then...
Can I just ask, where was your father's business based? You said he started the business in Kingsland.
Yeah, well, he just worked from home, and he had a lorry, 2.5 ton lorry, which you can actually see a picture of the lorry outside Sunnyside in the garage office, one of those 3 photos on the wall.
Yeah.
This is a shot of the street, and you can see the lorry parked down the bottom there. Yeah. So then, when I was really small, I remember going around all the neighbourhood here. I'd go fishing and hunting and whatever. But I remember Serge Preece being in the shed next to the Corners Inn pub there. There was a shop there that Serge Preece used to repair all the bicycles.
Yeah. And
I used to go in there and pester him, to do various little bits on our bikes. I can't remember who was next door. There was another shop next door there, but I can't really remember who that was. But I used to maraud around all the woods and the fields here, so one day I found a cannonball in one of the fields up towards Mortimer's Cross, and it was obviously a cannonball from the Wars of the Roses, which I took home and we cleaned it up, and cut a long story short, I took it to school one day when I was going to Leominster Grammar School, and somebody pinched it, so that was the end of that. And down in the garage here, I always used to talk to George. George was the mechanic that worked for my Uncle Maurice. And Uncle Maurice was pretty good to me. He had a lot of old cars up the top in those days, and we used to go and play in them and everything. And I can remember Uncle Maurice had even put me on his knee and let me drive the Austin 16 down the main street of Kingsland there. There wasn't much traffic in those days. And George used to be the mechanic, and I'd watch him. They had a workshop there with a pit in it, and George would be working on Morris 8s and Ford Prefects and all the old stuff. And so I'd be in there watching him, yeah. And if he just done an engine up or something, I'd be allowed to do the first start. So I always remember that. And he, in George's later life, particularly when he retired, he started collecting coins. He had one of these scanner things.
Metal detector.
Yeah, and he used to mark out the fields meticulously around here with a string and go up and down with this metal detector. And the stuff he found was unbelievable, you know. You'd be talking to George, you know, about nothing one day, and then all of a sudden he'd say, "Have you ever seen a King George V penny?" "No." So he'd pull one out of his pocket, you know, and stuff like that. A funny boy. But that was pretty interesting. And then, of course, when I was old enough to drive tractors, you couldn't keep me off them, and I was great friends with Arthur Morgan. He had the farm that's now all sold up, but I spent a lot of time with Arthur, and I used to do a bit of work in the workshop there, and I was always on the tractor and baler. He at that stage he just bought a new Nuffield 460 tractor, brand new, and I remember driving that with a baler behind round the fields there, and it was so nice to drive a brand new tractor, you know. And now, of course, you see the stuff that's around here today, and it looks like an antique, but then it was really good. So yeah, Arthur used to be he used to get really worried about me sometimes, because he had an old McCormick baler, and it had a petrol, kerosene, or TVO as you call it here, engine on the top, and you used to start it on petrol and then turn it over to TVO and let it run. And it had a big flat belt drive on a huge flywheel, and sometimes if you went in too hard to pick up the straw, it'd either stall the engine or throw the belt off. Most of the times you used to throw the belt off, so that was all right, but if the engine stalled, you couldn't start it for about half an hour, so we were always careful with it, you know. But what I used to do then, if it threw the belt off, I'd leave the engine running, crawl inside the chute of the baler, and I wound the flywheel back first, so the ram was right back, and then you'd pull all the straw out that had bunched up in there, and then you'd have the ram right at the back of the stroke, and then with the engine revved up on the baler, I'd gradually feed this flat belt on till it bit, and then it'd have enough momentum to start the baler off again. And Arthur used to freak out, you know. I was going to get my hands caught in this, because there were no guards on it or anything in those days. And I so you look back on all these things. I used to go out with a Land Rover in the morning. You had well, it was new then, I suppose, Series 1 Land Rover with a 4-wheel trailer, and feed the sheep, and you just put the Land Rover in low range first gear, and pull the hand throttle out a bit, and just climb on the back of the trailer as it wandered around the field, and throw the mangles off, or whatever we had there, you know, on the back. So yeah, it's a little bit different in those days. There's no such thing as workplace health and safety. And then I remember on the farm, I spent a lot of time with on Arthur's farm because there was so much stuff there. And he had a big grain dryer around the back because they always used to do their own harvesting. They had a harvester, and we'd come in, tip the grain into this big grain dryer, and it was diesel fired, and it was a bit of a drama to light this thing up because if you got too much diesel in there when you lit it, it'd go off with a bit of a bang and there were flames everywhere. But then this had a big blower underneath, and it'd dry all the grain to a specific temperature, and then they'd get tipped out and augered into the feed, which then went to feed the pigs, which Alfred used to look after. Alfred was the German guy, or Polish, I forget which. No, I think he was German. I think he was German. And of course he was here during the war and stayed on with Arthur, and he used to rear had quite a big shed next to the workshop. It was the piggery. I don't know how many pigs were in there, quite a lot. And that was Alfred's job. But you see, in those days, they didn't buy feed in. It was all hammer milled from the grain that they used to grow. But thereabout, and of course, then the straw was used for the bedding, and they used to make up this feed for the pigs, and then get skim milk from somewhere or water and mix it up to a bit of a gruel and feed it to the pigs, and they loved it and did well. So yeah, that was that. And next to when we moved up to Glendour, John Carlson used to farm a field opposite us, so I used to wander over there now and again. And then Andrew Owens was in a farm a couple of houses up, and I remember Andrew. God, he was a funny old boy. He used to sing in the church choir as well, and he used to get us in awful trouble because he was only short and you could only see his bald head over the top of the back pew. So in the sermon, he'd gradually move up like that, and then pull a face at it, cross his eyes, and of course all us choir boys would start giggling. And Charlie Jones, the headmaster, used to sit behind us in the corner of the pew. He always used to sit there, and he'd lean over and quiet you boys, you know. And then of course Andrew he'd take that on board and really start to annoy us. So strange the things you remember. Further afield, I suppose. Then I used to go hunting and fishing and whatever with Tom Davies. Tom and I used to go to school together, and we became great mates, and we used to ride our push bikes all around the countryside here. So we'd be off, you know, as country boys did in those days, rambling around, and you know, you'd never worry about being out late at night or anything like that. There was never seemed to be a problem here. And I particularly remember I know this is all going backwards and forwards, but things come to mind. But when I was a real little kid and went to Kingsland School here, I used to walk down the road past the bakery, and I'd always go into the bakery, and Jack was the fella that was one of the bakers. He had only one eye, I think. I can't remember his other name. He was also one of the bell ringers at the church and did various jobs at the church. And Charlie Jones always used to call him John, but his name was Jack, and we always used to have a bit of a giggle about that. And anyway, I used to go down there and see Jack, and they'd be thumping the dough and had this big mixer going down there, and he'd always cut me off a little bit, and I'd make a loaf and put it to one side, and then he'd cook it, and then on the way home I'd go and pick it up. So or at lunchtime, I can't remember what it was. So I always had had my little tiny fresh loaf of bread. And of course the shop then was fully functional with Fred and Walter, and we used to go in there and get a threepenny Wall's ice cream or whatever it was in the day, bottle of Vimto or something. So the shop was good. It's sad to see the shop's gone, because that really was the centre of the village in those days. You know, it had a lovely wide staircase going up, a flight of stairs in the front, and of course the two big the two big shop windows, one each side, and always kept nicely, and they had a good range of stuff there. So yeah, that it was a shame when that went. What else happened around the place? Then I probably, a bit later on, I started to get interested in doing a few jobs to make a few dollars or pounds, I should say. So I got friendly with Bill Bengry in Leominster, and I went in there. Probably only, I think, 13ish. I think when I started going in there and pumping petrol. So I'd pump petrol at night after school. Normally after grammar school, I'd go and do a bit of homework or whatever. And then they had a little kiosk in the front of the garage at the bottom of the bargates there, where the service station is still. And I'd sit in there and pump petrol till about 10 o'clock at night, and we used to close up.
When you say pump petrol, what you mean? You would
serve the customers, yeah.
Mm.
And we had the regular customers that used to come in, of course, and so I used to have my days to do that. And at 10 o'clock, Bill's wife would usually run me home then to Kingsland, because in the winter obviously it was pretty cold, a bit too cold to ride a push bike, although I did sometimes. I used to come home. Anyway, then I used to then go in on the weekends and work in the workshop. And I remember I went in there, and Bill always used to pull my leg a bit about doing different jobs, and he said, "I got a Rolls Royce for you to work on." And I said, "What?" Anyway, I went into the workshop, and here was this big old Rolls Royce sitting in there, and it belonged to Hamlyn Williams down here. And apparently it had a burnt out exhaust valve, and of course they only worked mainly on European cars, Volkswagens and Volvos and Saabs and all that sort of thing, and nobody wanted to touch this thing. It was too old, So he said, "Can you do it?" I said, "Yeah, I'll have a go." So anyway, I pulled the cylinder head off this thing, and we put a couple of new valves in and ground them in. I did the tappets, and I remember the tappets were 4/1000ths of an inch, very, very fine clearance. So I set all the tappets up to 4 thou and pressed the button, and off it went, and it was so smooth, this engine, I can remember it. And so Hamlin got his car done, because he was always short of cash. When I was really small, and we used to have tea or something at Auntie Muriel's, in the garage. Invariably, somebody had come along at about 7 o'clock at night when it was freezing cold. It would be a foot of snow around everywhere, and Hamlyn Williams would pull up in his Rolls Royce and want a gallon of cheap. So you'd put a gallon of the cheap in this Rolls Royce, and he'd toddle off down the road again. I don't think he ever went more than about 5 miles in the thing, So that was funny. But yeah, people would come in and it'd be a flurry of snow, and they'd say, Al, can you get the petrol? Yeah, I'd go out there and serve a couple of gallons or whatever it might be. And then they had the office used to be under the bottom floor of the office, well, where the office is now.
And we're talking about Markham's.
Markham's, yeah.
We haven't explained that your mother was Maurice Markham's sister, have we?
No, we haven't. Well, Mum was Maurice's sister, and Percy, and Auntie Margie was Mum's sister, yeah. So, Mum's side of the family was all the Markhams, yeah. Don't really know much about Dad's family, my dad's. I never, because his parents died fairly young, I think, and he was born in Africa, and came over here when he was about 5, I think. And he had a brother whom I met. Dad's brother was Uncle Arthur Lowe, not the Arthur Lowe from the TV. And Dad sort of didn't talk about it much. I don't think he was a very nice man, Dad's father. So, so I never really knew that side of the family at all. It was strange. But Uncle Maurice and Auntie Muriel, I used to half live there, in the garage. anyway, after I'd served petrol, I'd go in there, and they had this big old cash register that Brian still got, the one with the handle, and you used to punch the numbers in and wind the handle, and then I'd try and work out the change, and I was hopeless, but anyway, I think I got it right most of the time. So then we went up to Glendour. We moved up there, where the horse boutique is now, and Dad embarked on building that big shed at the back, which was a deep litter house of the day, and it was probably fairly modern for the day, because he welded up all the roof. I don't know what they call those things now. The things that hold the roof up, you know. Trusses, yes, the trusses. He welded them up out of like about 2.5-inch galvanised water pipe, all plated, with an oxyacetylene set. It was all welded up with oxy. And the walls were made out of woodsamere, which was brand new on the market in those days. They had the factory down at Shobden Airfield there.
Was it Peter Walker's invention?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was definitely woodsamere. So yeah, that was a new system, and then they just slotted in, you know, the panels. So he did all that, and then it was filled with peat, and they had the chickens in there with hoppers that he made, wood hoppers. And I think it went all right, you know. They had, I don't know how many chickens they had in there, but a lot. And people used to come by and buy some eggs, and the rest used to go off to the market. And a couple of the older residents around would come in and get half a dozen cracks. They'd get the cracked eggs, and it'd only be a few pence or something, you know. Half a dozen cracks. So in those days we de-beaked the chickens so they couldn't peck.
Right.
And they had a de-beaker there, and I remember doing that. You put the beak in and tramp the pedal, and it had a hot knife, and it cut the tip off. It didn't hurt didn't go back into the quick of the beak. You only had to take a very tiny bit off the tip, and then they just couldn't grab the feathers out of the other chickens, because they really, once one started to bleed or whatever, they'd kill it. It was so it was pretty necessary, I guess, in those days. And then we had a plague of mice. Wow, I've never seen so many mice. We used to go in there at night, and they had the feed hoppers had they were about 4 feet long, and all you could see was a row of tails hanging down underneath the hopper, and we used to drag these mice out and knock them off. But I think it was a losing battle. I don't think we got rid of the mice until all the chickens went, and then of course the deep litter was cleaned out and put on the fields for fertiliser, and then you got a new lot in and put more chickens in, and then of course the mice had gone somewhere else by then. So that was pretty interesting. I had a couple of old engines I used to play with down the back shed there, and my granddad had a garden shed down the back, and he used to spend nearly all his days down there, and he was pretty good on clocks.
And that was Lawrence Markham.
Lawrence.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he'd be. We've still got one of the miniature grandfather clocks he made. So he used to get little bits of wood and oak and mechanisms, and I remember there were clocks in bits and springs and hands and all sorts of stuff. So that was his hobby, which has been transferred to me in a way, because I still like that sort of thing, even now. So, and I don't think much then changed until they passed away. Both Marion and Lawrence, they were my grandparents. They passed away, and then shortly after that, I think Mum and Dad decided to emigrate to Australia, because they had also been they'd had somebody had what do they call it when they not an alibi, but you have to have somebody sponsor. You had to have somebody to sponsor you, to say you were a good character, and could carry on a trade, or they were looking for tradespeople in Australia, like professional people and tradespeople. That's what they were looking for.
And what year was this?
This was in 1964.
So you were just still a boy, really?
Yeah.
15.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the two, these were friends of the family. I called them Uncle Ted and Uncle Joe, but they weren't real uncles, but they were people who Mum and Dad had known for some time. Anyway, they'd gone over. They were both bricklayers, so they were pretty well settled in Brisbane. And so then we went. We were sponsored by them, so we went over, stayed at their place for a few months, and actually then Dad bought a block of land, about 3 houses up in Webster Road at Stafford in Brisbane, and then built a house there. So that was how that went. And then of course I came back here with Myra when we got married, and stayed here for a year and helped Brian the garage, and well, yeah, it all happened again. You know, it was just like coming home, really. You know, and it still is a bit like that.
Yeah.
It's strange when you've been born in a particular country and you go somewhere else. You if you're away from your long-term place of residence, like Australia in my case, you always say, "Oh, we're going home now." But then if I'm there, I'm going home. Yeah. So it's weird. But you know, your roots, I think, are always where you're born.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's been good for us. So you know, you can't complain wherever you are, really. But I think my to sum up, really, I think my life here when I was a child, I wouldn't trade that for anywhere.
Yeah.
You know.
Can you describe the garage as it was in those days? Because it's changed a lot, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. Well, the garage, Greycoat was still a black and white cottage where Auntie was, and the actual office block there was still outwardly much the same. But when you went in, you walked in from the main road here, past what is the door that goes upstairs, and then there was a lean-to on the side of it, and the lean-to had a big row of highboy oil containers, because everybody wanted oil in that, so they come in for a gallon of petrol and a pint of oil, because all the old cars were oil burners. So we had Castrol, or Maurice had Castrol, Castrolite, XL and double XL. So, and you know, all the oils we got 100 different brands now, but there were only a couple in those days, and you didn't have much choice. You had light, medium, or heavy grade. So, and then we had the little conical oil containers there. So you'd pump a pint out, or two, or a quart, or wherever it was, and put it in the car. And then a bit further in, on that left-hand wall, I remember one time I went in there and there was an open plug socket, and I think one of Uncle Maurice's temporary repairs was a piece of silver paper that had joined two of the terminals together. And of course, me being me, went to dig the silver paper out and got a hell of a boot and got thrown against the oil highboys. So anyway, then you went almost down to the end, and which would be where the door is now, and turned left into the door, and on the right hand side of that door, where you go down into what's now your customers' waiting room, there used to be two big, I don't know, there's a special name for them, I think, but there were two big metal cages full of straw, and then in the middle of the straw was a big round glass bottle with a cork in, and that was full of sulfuric acid for the batteries. And then on the far wall you had the battery charger set up, and then all these accumulators. Apparently people in those days had these glass accumulators that had to be charged up to run their radio or whatever if they didn't have power on some of the farms, so they just had, you know, a rudimentary light and a radio, so they could sort of be in contact. But I remember people bringing these accumulators in to be charged, and batteries, of course, for the cars. So, and that place, man, you wouldn't want to smoke, you know. I mean, you'd go down there, all you could smell was ozone, and it must have been the hydrogen off all those things bubbling away must have been horrendous, you know. So I don't know how it never blew up, but that was that part, and then you sort of turned left where the office part is now, and as far as I can remember, it was only a very small room. It was only like, it wouldn't have been more than 5 feet wide, that end bit, and the till was up on a bench on the right hand side, sort of thing, and there were a couple of chairs there. And I remember Reg Hamer used to be one of Uncle's workers or something. I think he used to drive the bus, and Reg was a shortish man with glasses, and he had mutton chops, mutton chop moustaches, what each side. And he was a nice fellow. But they were really good, you know. I mean, I don't know what they did half the time. They just used to lounge around and smoke. And I guess they got some work done, you know. But knowing Uncle Maurice, it wouldn't have gone at a great pace. So that's what that looked like. And then walking from the petrol pumps were actually two of the really old style pumps. They still had electric motors. They weren't the gravity ones, but they were just to the right of the wall as you go into the garage, if you know what I mean. They were just two pumps sitting there on the road, just on the footpath. So that's where we used to serve the petrol. And then there was then you walked in, and there was a big oval topped open barn in the front that the buses were in. And to my memory, there were always a couple of old ones in there that didn't go, but there was a guy, I think it was a Guy Vixen. There was it's either a Guy Warrior or a Guy Vixen bus. That was all, I mean, it was a really nice bus. We used to go in there when we were kids, and the upholstery was all that beautiful sort of suede-y red and black patterned upholstery in it, and it was all in good condition. I really don't know why that one wasn't used. It must have had a problem. They just parked it up. And then of course he'd have the buses in there that were in use of the day, and I think one was the one that Reg used to drive, and there was a pit in there too, and then there was a division, and then you went into the next bay, which also had a pit, but it went the other way, and that's where George did most of the work. And then at the end, where the oil tanks are now, was an old thunderbox toilet there that George used, that always had a string with about 20 sheets of Women's Day or something there as toilet paper. And then where Godfrey's place is, then you walk up. Oh, hang on, there was a shed in between that. That's right, there was a lock-up shed in between that had the green Rover in that Bri used to drive early on. It was a Rover. It must have been about a 48 Rover 12, as it was a 4-cylinder one. And I bought. Oh, that's right. I bought a Rover off my uncle when I was 11 for £6. Yeah, this is another bit of story I haven't told you. Anyway, this Rover came in. It was a 48 Rover 14 Sportsman's Coupe, which now would be worth an awful lot of money. And anyway, I said, "Can I buy it off you, Uncle?" And it was black with this beautiful green leather inside. He said, "Yes." He said, "You can have it for £6." So I went and saw Dad, and we scrounged up £6 and paid it and drove it up home. Oh, this was up to Glendour. And we used to race this thing around the 5-acre field at the back there. That was Dad's field there. And all the kids in the village used to come up and bring a gallon of petrol, and we'd put it in and then drive till we exhausted the petrol and leave it wherever the car stopped. But we got a bit more daring, I suppose you'd say. Later on, we had a sheet of corrugated iron turned up at the front that we used to drag around, and we could get two kids on that. They'd hang onto the iron on the front, and we'd go belting around the field with grass flying over and dock leaves and nettles and stuff be flying over the front of this thing. And nobody ever got hurt. It's amazing. So so that was that was one of the eras where we started driving these cars. And then Tom Davies and I then bought a Morris 8 and a J4 bread van, a Morris J4 a J2 Morris bread van, and we took them both to Shobden. And in those days, the airfield was still disused, so we used to flog these things around the airfield. Same thing, we take a couple of gallons of petrol up there and drive these things flat out around the along the airstrips and that there, and then I'd park them there until the next week when we could afford another gallon of petrol. But coming back to the garage, there were a couple of lockups on the right hand side. They were painted green. They were timber, and they were painted dark green. And I'm not sure if the Crossley was in one and the Rover was in one, but I know that I definitely remember the green Rover 12 that was in one of them. And then you walked up the top, and where Godfrey's house is now, and that was full of Uncle Morris's treasures. There was all the old cars up there. There were Humbers, Lanchesters, there were Vauxhalls, all sorts of really lovely old vintage cars that you'd love to have, And I remember some of them had these pre-selector gearboxes. We used to go in there and play in these things. That was what it looked like. And then just in at the back of Auntie Muriel's garden was a pigsty there too. I think that's all gone, of course. Mm-hmm. But that's where the end bay of the MOT place is. About there was quite a big brick pigsty. They always used to keep a pig in there. So that's what it looked like in the early days. Yeah. Anything else?
Wow, absolutely marvellous. Do you want to go on a little bit more?
I don't.
Okay, school.
What about if you can extract anything more from me?
Kingsland School. Can you remember that?
Yeah, Kingsland School. Much the same as it is now, but it didn't have that new wing on the left. And we used to walk in there, and there was on the right hand side there was just like a porch area there where they used to bring milk in. They had those little half-pint bottles, and it used to be that cold in the morning. Sometimes it would be frozen, and you'd have to sort of try and get it out as best you could. And I didn't like the milk anyway. I didn't like milk for some reason, and but we had to drink this stuff. We collect in there, and then I think we had 2 classrooms. Mr. Jones, who's the school headmaster, Charlie Jones, who lived next door. He had one room, and then the big long room at the back, which is still, I believe, the same. That was the other room, and then down the back was another building with Harry Welson used to teach in there. And we were taught the usual things. 3 R's, and I remember Charlie Jones used to do a bit of geometry with us and all that sort of thing. We had to do a few things that he'd go around and he'd look, why haven't you done that or something? And he said, I think you need a bit of stick. So he'd haul you out. I never got it there, but I didn't. Colin Addis? Colin Addis, I think, was one of the kids there. Used to fairly regularly get out, so Charlie Jones would go to the cupboard in the corner and select one of these canes and flex it, and then you'd have to put your hand out and he'd give you a whack, and if you pulled your hand away, boy, that you'd never do that because you'd get half a dozen after that. So, we were all, but I tell you what, it made you concentrate on what you were doing. So they were all pretty good, and then old Harry Welson was a bit grumpy down the back, and but we used to do a lot of marquetry there, which was very strange but it was like a manual arts thing. I don't think we ever had saws or anything like that, but I can distinctly remember we'd have a block with a frame on, and we had to do a picture. So you'd have sheets of veneer, and in those days like a scalpel, which you'd wonder about, with little kids, and a ruler or something, and you'd be cutting out these different shapes and then gluing them into the thing. And some of them were pretty good, They were just a scene like a tree or a sheep or something like that. So I really remember that part of it. And then the other was just ordinary lessons down there, of course. But from my memory, I think there was Charlie Jones, Harry Wilson, and Mrs. Morgan. I don't know her first name. I think they were the only 3 teachers in the school in those days.
How many do you think in a class?
Oh, wouldn't be many. How many would there be? Probably 15 or 20 max, I would think. Yeah. So I remember quite a lot of them. Valerie Crump was there. There's Mavis Dyke down here and her sister, and Fatty Fletcher from Fletcher's Butchers in Leominster, and of course Tom Davies and me, and Philip Plevy and Rosemary Plevy and David Aberley. A lot of names that I still know. Now, all the like Bowen boys, I think, were probably. Oh no, they might have been. Oh, he's probably Richard's probably my age, isn't he? The Bowen twins, the twins.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Did you have hot dinners in those days at school?
We did in grammar. I don't think we did at Kingsland. I can't remember having hot dinners at Kingsland.
Do you think you went home for dinner?
I think we might have, yeah. Yeah. No, I remember the milk, but now you've got me now. There might have been. I can't remember if it was the grammar school or there, but I know they used to bring the school dinners in these big hot boxes, the type they use on aeroplanes now. They have all the dinners packed in the hot boxes, and they bring them out. And at grammar school, they were horrible. I mean, they were terrible. I mean, I don't know what they made them out of, but boy, they weren't all that good.
So grammar school was in Leominster, and you went when you were 11.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I passed the 11 plus, and with a few of the others from around here, and we went there. You either went secondary modern there or Luckton. I think they were the 3 major things, and I think Leominster was more. They did a lot more manual arts stuff, which is obviously the way I gravitated, and that's probably why I went there. But it was. The school days were always good,
And to get to school from here to Leominster, would you have cycled?
I used to either cycle or get on the Primrose Motors bus, and the bus stop then was where just behind the Marco's there, where the car park is. That was the bus stop.
Yeah.
We used to walk up from Grammar to the bus stop and then get the bus home here. Yeah, and they were just little 21-seater Bedfords at the time. They used to grind along. Yeah, but, and Reg was one of the drivers, Reg Hamer. Because we knew all the drivers too,
Yes.
So it was no problem, and they'd often wait for you if you were late, And later on, when I was at Glendour here, the school bus used to come down Old North Road, and the winters were bitterly cold. Not like now; they were bitter, and I used to have to stand out there and wait for the bus, and of course some mornings it'd be late. Some mornings the diesel even froze in the tank, they used to say, so I don't know how true that was, but it was certainly the buses were late, so I used to stick a pair of wellies in the bottom of the Rayburn until they were nearly melting, and then put 2 pair of socks on and go and stand out. In about 10 minutes your feet would be frozen again. So I really remember waiting for the bus. Oh boy, it wasn't a good experience, but anyway, we all survived.
Yeah.
I can't think of many other stories to tell.
Did you ever have ferrets and that kind of thing as a boy?
Yeah. I didn't have them. Tom had a stint of having ferrets. We used to where Tom lives at Shirlheath, where Lewis has got his milking shed there. There used to be, I think it's still standing, a shed with a curved roof, probably left over from the war surplus thing, and it had a double skinned section in the bottom of the roof, and the rats used to live in there. So we used to work out all these ways of getting these rats out, and so anyway, I was reading up one day about how you smoke these rabbits and rats out, and in the end we used to get strips of cardboard and soak it in saltpeter and cayenne pepper. We put it out to dry. Once it had dried, we used to shove these strips in one end and light them, and then blow the smoke in, and then wait the other end with the air rifle for the rats to come out. I don't think we ever got one from memory, but they used to come out all right. They'd be 100 miles an hour. They'd run past through your feet and gone, So, but we used to have a lot of fun trying. And the same with the rabbits. And of course, we used to net the holes and either put the ferrets in or try and smoke them out, and they come out the other end and you catch them. But and we used to go badgering and all that sort of thing around the place. But of course, that's all. Now I wouldn't. I wouldn't kill anything these days. It's just, but how you were then, it was a totally different life.
Do you mean you'd kill a badger?
Oh, they used to go badgering around here with all the time with terriers, little terrier dogs, and that you go to a badger set. When I think about it now, it's terrible, really. I mean, they had little short-legged terriers, and the smaller the better. So the guys used to shove them down the badger hole, and then of course they'd go and bail the badger up, and then the guys used to lie down on the ground and listen until they had a handle on where the dog was underground. Then they'd dig a hole and retrieve the dog and shoot the poor old badger. For what reason now I really don't know. I guess it was because they were considered vermin for destroying the ground or foundations of sheds or whatever. Don't really know. It was just one of the other blood sports they had, same as fox hunting. And otter hunting too. We used to go otter hunting, and we'd walk along all the banks of the river. We'd go along the Lug or the Wye or whatever, the Arrow, and all the guys who used to go along follow the hunt had long poles, and you'd ram the poles in under the riverbank to disturb the badgers, and then of course a pack of hounds, to disturb the otters, something. And the hounds would be in the water half the time anyway. They'd be in the water, and as soon as a poor old otter came out, they'd be on it, And there again, why? Why would you hunt the poor old otters, And luckily now they're all coming back again. So, so that used to happen. And of course we'd go fishing. We'd go up here to the Pinsley on the corner where Wenham and Elliot was, where they used to live on the farm. At the brook, the little bridge there, and we'd fish that because you could fish off any bridge that was legal, and we'd catch trout there and you could often see them they'd just be in the shadow of the end of the bridge. So what we used to do, one of us used to go one side and one would go the other end, and just float a maggot or two down on a hook, and we'd say, hang on, whoa, bit more, and you'd more or less get it in front of the fish's nose, and they'd either take it or they wouldn't, But we'd got fish there, and where the Pinsley Brook, it went on down through Arthur Morgan's farm, and there was another little bridge there, just like a tractor bridge. You took the tractor over, and we used to get them out of there as well. And then on the way to don't know where it was now, Erdsland. Is it Erdsland? Used to go through Erdsland and over the next intersection, and then the next bridge was on the Arrow, and there was, in those days, I went over there recently, and it doesn't seem as big now as it was then, but then a lot of things don't seem as big now as they did when we were kids. But there was the biggest trout in there you've ever seen. Like, it was a huge one, and we tried to catch that thing, and we couldn't tempt it with anything. So that's obviously why it was so big. It was a fussy eater. So, but we tried hard. What else did we do?
Would you have had holidays away from the village?
Yeah, we did. Dad had an old Austin 16. The registration plate was DLL, so we called it DLL. And they had an old teardrop-shaped caravan. Now, I don't know if that was Dad's or if he borrowed it or whatever, but we used to quite often go to Cornwall. And one of the places we went to there was St. Just in Roseland, which I always remember. And we, in fact, last time we were here, we went down to Cornwall. You probably remember we went down there a couple of weeks and took Myra down there and went to St. Just, and I recognised the area where we used to stay. So we had a few quite nice holidays: Polzeth, Polperro, Rill, all the usual places down there. But Cornwall was one of the places I think we always gravitated to, that I can remember on holidays anyway. And then, of course, Maurice used to do day trips to Aberystwyth or whatever, which we used to go on, and we used to go to Landrinnid Wells, and they had the old putt-putt boats on the lake there. We used to go on those. And the Three Counties show, never missed that. I love the Three Counties show. So,
how would you have got to that?
I went with Dad. Dad had the two Ford Thames vans for work, and he had a boring machine too. That's probably it. Dad's company became George and Lowe. It wasn't because his name was George Lowe. It was because he went in partnership with Bill George. So Bill George and George Lowe. It was a bit confusing probably for people, but they teamed up, and Dad was a water diviner as well. He used to divine water with an old willow, not a hazel twig. And I've seen him walk over an obvious water course somewhere with a hazel twig, a freshly cut one, and it would waver and go right round, and it would actually strip the bark off the twig where he was holding it. That's how much power was in this thing. So I don't know. You can, the jury's still out on water divining, but there was obviously something there, and I tried it, and I used to get some movement out of it, but I could never really do it. But I could do it with two pieces of bent wire, and you'd walk over it, and when the wire crossed, you knew that there was something underneath. That definitely worked. Now, I don't know why or how, but and early on in my life I could never wear a watch. The magnetism in my body would stop the watch.
Same here.
Yeah, so isn't that weird? So there was obviously something in all this divining caper. And anyway, they used to do boreholes. They had a big boring machine, and that they used to drag around with the truck, and and they used to put boreholes down all around this area. And they also used to put hydraulic rams in around the Welsh Mountains because the hydraulic ram is a pump that doesn't need any outside power, but it needs a hilly terrain. So you would install the pump at the bottom of a stream where you had a supply of water that ran down the stream all the time, and it'd run. You'd pipe it into the hydraulic ram, and the hydraulic ram had a big chamber on the top, an air chamber, so the water would run down, fill up the air chamber until it got compressed, and then that would open a little valve at the bottom, and then it'd discharge that water through the valve until the pressure was equalised again, and then that operation would start again. So a small quantity of water was pumped into the outlet pipe every time that happened, and this thing would be going clunk, 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 day and night. It was until it wore out. It needed nothing, and that small amount of water then would be pumped to wherever you wanted, a holding tank or a drinking trough or whatever. So really, they were once you got over the initial cost, they were a free source of pumping water for the farmers. So they worked well. But you needed hilly country. You couldn't do it in flat land. It wouldn't work. But the Welsh mountains here are ideal. So a lot of them went in those days.
Do you think that system's still used?
Well, I know there are hydraulic rams around. I don't know if they make new ones or not. But if they don't, they should, because it's very simple. But I think the problem is that they didn't displace a lot of water every stroke, so they needed to go day and night to supply any viable water. But they certainly worked okay. Yeah.
Would your father ever have taken a stand at the three counties?
Yeah.
He did?
Oh yeah, we had. Yeah. I've got a photo somewhere. I'll try and dig them up. I've certainly got a photo of the boring machine. With the stand and list of pumps, pumping sets, yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. Go in your file.
Yeah. Well, I'll try and look it up. Well, I know I've got them, so yeah. I'll try and get them. But so that was another era, I think, and I think then there was, partnerships, typical, dissolved, and and then they left anyway for Australia. So I don't know what happened to Bill George.
Did you have any pets, Alec? A dog or anything?
Had a cat called Bongo. He's black. And he used to sleep in my bed, and he used to sleep right in my bed because, he didn't want to get cold, so he'd just dive under the covers and sleep beside me till morning. Never had a dog. I've always wanted a dog, but I didn't have one. But I've made up for that now. We've always had dogs in Oz, but apart from that, I don't. No,
Did your mother work as well? I know she looked after your grandparents.
Yeah. No, only with the chickens and stuff like that. There was always work to do there, and of course there was work to do with the grandparents and all that. And look, she might have done odd jobs around the place, but I don't think she had a regular job. No.
Well, I think that's just marvellous. Anything else come to mind?
Not yet.
No, lovely picture of only 15 years. You see, it's extraordinary, isn't it, what you can do in 15 years? Yeah.
It's quite a long time when you think about it. Like, once you're over the 5-year-old stage into the next 10 years, that's when you really do start to remember a lot of stuff. Yeah. But it was certainly an interesting place to be. I mean, there was a lot of things happening daily, because everything was in a small way manual. There wasn't intense farming. So, even like Andrew Owens' farm, even though it was very small, they still made their own butter. They still milked a cow, They had a dairy in the side there where I could go in and stick my finger in the cream thing, and then have a go at churning the butter in the old butter churn and all that sort of stuff.
Can you remember the name of Andrew Owens's farm? I can't picture.
No,
Was he?
Yeah, well, Glendour driveway, go up, then there's a house there, then there's a lane, a long lane that goes down to the river, and Andrew Owens's place is next.
Must be where Ray Gore lives now.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was his farm there. And honestly, nothing's changed. That farm looks exactly the same. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something else I was going to ask. No, it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you learnt a lot from the basics of daily existence then. Because a lot of things you couldn't, you could buy ice cream and a few things as a treat. But there wasn't a lot of rubbish on the market. All the food I think was pretty wholesome stuff. Everybody grew a few potatoes or some beans, and you got the seasonal vegetable and fruit. And of course, when we were kids, we never shy about scrumping a few apples on whatever was your favourite apple tree around the place. And now, sadly, I know that next to Glendour there on the road side was like a triangular orchard there that now they've built houses on.
Yes.
But that had some of the most delicious apples that you could imagine. I don't know what it was, but there was one tree there. It had vivid red apples. I mean, they were really red, and inside the red would permeate just slightly into this snow white flesh, and God, they were just delicious. I don't know. A lot of the apples these days, they seem to have Jonathans and something else like. Almost like red and white, and that's it. And they've all been bred to death, so they won't bruise and they won't do this and that, but they don't taste much like apples anymore. So the old things like Cox's Orange Pippin and Beauty of Bath, all those old type of apples, they're the ones I remember that had really good flavour. And we knew where the trees were, so we go and pinch them. Nobody worried too much about those days. Most of the time you pick them off the ground anyway. They were windfalls, so they'd probably only gone to the grubs anyway. So.
What about cider apples? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember trying to eat them. They weren't too good. I reckon there were some cider apples that were almost edible. Some were quite sweet, but they still had that. They suck your cheeks in, when you took a bite out of them. But yeah, there again, Jenkins' farm down here, I was pretty friendly with Roger Jenkins, and we used to go and pick cider apples off the ground, of course, and chuck them in the trailer. And now and again we get a ride into Hereford on the top of the apples on the trailer into Bulmer's. And Mr. Jenkins had a Nuffield tractor too, a pretty new one, and it was in the day that they were fast on the road. They must have done 15 miles an hour. Those boy, they were fast. So it took a while to get into Hereford, but yeah, I remember sitting on the top of the apples, getting a ride in. God, you wouldn't be able to do that in a fit these days. So but that's what we used to do. But the cider making, I don't think I ever went to see cider being pressed in the old stone. I think they used to do it at Mortimer's Cross. It was just about finished when I was a child there. I'm sure they were still going. They were still going probably when we left, but I think that was about the end of it, so about 1960-ish. I think they would have given up pressing cider there, but of course all the locals used to go and take a load of cider apples in to be pressed and pay a few bob, I suppose, and take the juice home and do whatever they did with it. Yeah, because everybody made cider, didn't they?
I believe so.
Dandelion wine and all the rest of it. I think that's where I got my appreciation of food and wine and drink from the local area, because you always remember back to how good it was in those days.
So would you have had 3 meals a day at home, or 4 meals, or 2 meals?
No, I think, on weekends, going back to the week, yes, we'd have probably 2.5 good meals a day. Like, you'd always have breakfast, and breakfast was always a fry-up, you'd have bacon and eggs and fried bread and a bit of black pudding perhaps, or something, I can't remember really having cereal for breakfast in those days. We had toast and marmalade or something, or jam or whatever, or Marmite had just come on the market around that time, and that was a big thing. So we always had Marmite, but yeah, very rarely. And I think we had Wheat Bix. Trying to think what other cereal we had. Maybe cornflakes. I don't know, but not much. Oh, porridge, of course. We had porridge. That was the other thing we used to have. But mainly we'd have bacon and eggs, and then for lunch we might just have a light lunch, sandwich or something like that. And then an evening meal was always a decent meal. It might be a casserole or some nice smoked haddock, or typical sort of meals. And then on Sunday we'd usually have a joint, a roast, or in those days if you had a chicken, that was quite that was something, that was a bit of a treat. So we just have the usual pork, beef or lamb, or in the week we'd have sausages and all that sort of thing. And Mum used to make toad in the hole quite often, which was sausages in the batters, I don't think we ever had spaghetti or any pasta, which was weird when you think about it now. And I think I had my first pizza in Melbourne when I was about 18. And I couldn't believe watching these guys, fling up these rounds of the base in the air and catch them and then make all this stuff on. And I think even when I was a kid that even olive oil was more medicinal than something that you used to cook with.
Would your mother have shopped mostly in the village?
Yeah, or Leominster. Yeah, I don't think and Hereford now and again. I can remember going into the market in Hereford. That big arched off the square there. You go in there and there was always a fishmonger just by the door, and then you'd go in and you'd be the usual butchers and.
And did she drive, your mother?
Oh yeah, always. Yeah. Mum drove in the war in the ATS, so she used to drive lorries in the war, and pretty accomplished actually. She was a good driver, and she used to drive staff cars, so they'd have Humbers, big old Humbers, or cars of that ilk, sort of drive the chiefs around, So yeah,
she grew up in Kingsland, but was she? Well, no, she came to Kingsland as a teenager, I think, didn't she? But where would she have done that in the ATS? Round here or somewhere quite different?
Always here, because she was born. All the kids were born at Oak Dean, Hope under Dinmore.
Yes.
That's where Lawrence and Marion Markham lived. That was their small holding there. So they would have all been born around that.
The younger children, I think.
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know where. I thought Percy and Maurice lived there too.
I think they'd started off Mortimer House up. No, up.
Oh, that's right.
Mortimer
They had
Street,
Yeah, Mortimer House.
But I
that's
think
right.
Maurice is quite a lot older than your mother.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's right. Yeah. But I've certainly got pictures of Mum and Auntie Margie at Oak Dean,
Ah.
so
Oh,
they definitely
I'd
live
love to
there.
see those,
Yeah. So, where was I going with that?
Well, your mum drove.
Oh, drove, that's
for
right.
the ATS.
So so she was in the ATS in the war, and later she used to even drive Dad's lorry loaded full of gravel or bricks or whatever if they had to go to some job. Yeah. And I remember going with Dad to fetch sand and gravel from Ames Street. They had a quarry there at Ames Street, just over the bridge to the right-hand side. You used to drive up a gravel road up the hill, and then they had this big trommel there that used to grade all the gravel and everything. And I remember we used to back the lorry under this big chute, and they just let it go with a whoosh. It'd just go crash into the back, and the poor old lorry would sag, you know. And it was full of water as well, so the water would be all running out, and drive home. Oh, and the other thing too, the other place I remember, going down the Bargets, just before you come to where Bill Bengry's place was on the left, was the timber yard, Charlie Norgrove. And I used to love going in there because he had a big old gas engine in there that they used to drive the saw. And of course, a lot of time you go in and a lot of the timber wouldn't be sawn. It'd be in big logs still, not like a tree log, but it'd be a foot by a foot, say. And if you wanted like a 6x8 or whatever, they often had to saw it up for you while you waited. So Charlie Norgrove is a nice man. I remember him, because he always used to know I liked the engine, you know. And they used to have a blow lamp. It was an old gas thing, so they had a blow lamp there to heat the hot bulb on it, and then he'd get on the flywheel was about 7 or 8 feet tall on the thing. So he'd get on this thing, one leg on the one spoke and the hands, and swing it until it fired, you know. And then they'd feed these big pieces of timber through and saw them up to the required size. Yeah, so that was another thing I really remember, the yard there. And of course, I don't know when that went, but I think it must have been going for quite a while after we left.
I think the 80s.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, about the 80s, and yeah. But no, Mum was a good driver, really good driver, and she drove right until she was well into her 70s anyway. She always drove, yeah. I think that's just about everything I can remember offhand.
Well, Alec, honestly, that's marvellous. If you think of anything else,
I'll let you know.
we can switch it on again.
Yeah.
But shall I switch it off now?
Okay.
Yeah. I think I just do this.